These are 10 of the most terrifying serial killers ever exposed, not just for what they did, but for how easily they hid in plain sight. And we start immediately with number 1. Ted Bundy remains one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. Not because he looked dangerous, but because he didn't. Born in 1946 in Vermont, Bundy appeared intelligent, polite, and ambitious. He studied psychology, worked on political campaigns, and even volunteered at a crisis hotline, where he was praised for helping people in distress. To those around him, he represented stability and promise. Few suspected that behind this carefully constructed image, Bundy was developing a deep obsession with control, dominance, and violence. Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy carried out a series of murders across multiple U.S. states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and eventually Florida. What made Bundy especially dangerous was not brute force, but manipulation. He often approached young women in public places pretending to be injured, sometimes wearing a fake cast, sometimes asking for help carrying books or loading items into his car. He relied on empathy, on politeness, on the instinct to help someone who seemed harmless. Once his victims let their guard down, the situation changed instantly. Investigators believe Bundy murdered at least 30 women. The true number may be higher. During later interviews, Bundy hinted that he had killed more, but never gave a complete account. For years, he managed to stay mobile, crossing state lines and adapting his methods. This made it difficult for police departments to connect the crimes, especially at a time when communication between jurisdictions was limited. Bundy was eventually arrested, escaped custody twice, and continued killing after his escape. Each appearance reinforced the growing public fascination around him. His trial marked a turning point in American crime history. It was televised nationwide. Viewers watched as Bundy represented himself in court, spoke confidently, smiled at cameras. In one of the most disturbing moments of the trial, he even proposed marriage during the proceedings. In 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair, but his story did not end there. Bundy became one of the first serial killers to be transformed into a media figure. Books, documentaries, and films followed. Decades later, his crimes inspired multiple portrayals in popular culture, including television series and feature films that explored how someone so outwardly normal could commit such acts. Ted Bundy forced the public to confront an unsettling truth. Predators do not always look like monsters. Sometimes, they look like someone you would trust. John Wayne Gacy appeared to be an ordinary, respectable man, and that was exactly what made him so dangerous. Born in 1942, Gacy lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Illinois. He ran a successful construction business, owned his home, and was active in local political and community events. To those around him, he seemed friendly and dependable, a man who fit perfectly into suburban America. But behind that image, Gacy was living a hidden life. Between 1972 and 1978, he assaulted and murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men. Many of them disappeared quietly. Some were reported missing, others were not immediately noticed at all. What shocked investigators most was where the victims were found. When police finally searched Gacy's home, they discovered that most of the bodies had been buried in the crawl space beneath his house. Others had been dumped in nearby rivers. For years, the crimes had taken place directly beneath the floor of a normal family home, a place where Gacy entertained guests, spoke with neighbors, and lived his daily life. Gacy often targeted young men who were vulnerable. Some were looking for work and trusted him as an employer. Others were drawn in by familiarity and social access. Several warning signs had been missed. Complaints were dismissed. Disappearances were not immediately connected. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was Gacy's public persona. He occasionally performed at community and charity events dressed as Pogo the Clown. Although the costume was not directly involved in the murders, it became a powerful and unsettling symbol after his arrest. In 1980, John Wayne Gacy was convicted of 33 murders. He was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in 1994. His case permanently altered how Americans viewed safety in familiar environments because John Wayne Gacy proved one chilling truth. Evil does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it lives quietly behind a friendly smile. Jeffrey Dahmer was not charismatic, he was not confident, and he was not hiding behind charm. Born in 1960 in Wisconsin, Dahmer grew up withdrawn and socially isolated. From a young age, he showed disturbing behaviors and a fascination with death and dissection. As an adult, he lived a quiet, almost invisible life. To neighbors, he was strange but unremarkable, someone easy to ignore. Between 1978 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys. Most of his crimes took place inside his apartment in Milwaukee. Dahmer often approached his victims with simple offers: money, drinks, photography. Once inside his apartment, the situation changed. What made Dahmer's case especially disturbing was not only the violence, but how close authorities came to stopping him. Multiple warning signs were missed, complaints were minimized, witnesses were ignored. In one of the most infamous incidents, a 14-year-old victim escaped Dahmer's apartment and was found by police. Despite clear signs of distress, officers accepted Dahmer's explanation and returned the boy to him. That decision allowed Dahmer to continue killing for several more months. The failure exposed deep flaws: poor communication, institutional negligence, and biases that shaped how victims were treated. Dahmer was finally arrested in 1991 after another victim managed to escape and alert police. Inside his apartment, investigators discovered photographs, preserved remains, and evidence that shocked the world. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was killed by another inmate while serving his sentence. His case forced a painful reckoning, not only with the crimes themselves, but with the question of how many lives could have been saved. Years later, Dahmer's story became one of the most analyzed cases in criminal psychology. It inspired books, documentaries, and high-profile television adaptations that focus not on mystery, but on institutional failure. Jeffrey Dahmer did not hide behind charm. He hid behind indifference. Gary Ridgway did not stand out, and that was his greatest advantage. Born in 1949, Ridgway grew up in Washington State. He struggled academically, was described as socially awkward, and lived a quiet, unremarkable life. As an adult, he held steady employment as a truck painter. He married multiple times. To those around him, he appeared ordinary, but beneath that normality, Ridgway was committing acts of extreme violence. During the 1980s and 1990s, he targeted vulnerable women around the Seattle-Tacoma area. Many of them were living on the margins of society. Their disappearances did not always trigger immediate concern. Ridgway lured his victims into his vehicle, attacked them, and later disposed of their bodies in wooded areas near the Green River. That location would give him his name, the Green River Killer. What made Ridgway especially difficult to catch was his consistency. He followed the same patterns, the same locations, the same methods. Police spent years trying to identify him. The investigation became one of the longest and most expensive in U.S. history. At different times, Ridgway was questioned. He even passed polygraph tests, and each time, he was released. For decades, he blended into everyday life while continuing to kill. It was not until 2001 that advances in DNA technology finally linked Ridgway to multiple victims. He was arrested quietly, without resistance. During interrogations, Ridgway admitted to killing dozens of women. He spoke without emotion, without remorse. He was ultimately convicted of 49 murders and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Gary Ridgway revealed a disturbing truth. When victims are ignored, when disappearances are minimized, violence can continue for years without consequence. Ridgway was not invisible because he was clever. He was invisible because no one was looking closely enough. Pedro Lopez is often described as one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history, not because of mystery, but because of scale. Born in 1948 in Colombia, Lopez grew up in extreme instability. He was abandoned at a young age, lived on the streets, and was exposed to violence early in life. By adulthood, he had learned how to survive unnoticed. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Lopez targeted young girls across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. He focused on children from impoverished communities, those least protected, those least likely to be searched for. He approached them carefully, offering small gifts, promises of safety. Then he disappeared with them. Many victims were buried in remote locations. Some graves were shallow, others were never found. Because of this, the true number of victims may never be known. In 1980, Lopez was arrested in Ecuador. During questioning, he led investigators to multiple burial sites, confirming the scale of his crimes. What shocked the world was not only what he had done, but what happened next. At the time, Ecuadorian law allowed a maximum prison sentence of 16 years. Despite the number of victims, Lopez served his sentence. He was eventually released. After his release, his whereabouts became unclear. Authorities lost track of him. Rumors emerged that he may have killed again. Pedro Lopez was never formally held accountable for the full extent of his crimes. His case raised disturbing questions. What happens when justice systems are unprepared for crimes of this scale? What happens when borders, laws, and resources fail to protect the most vulnerable? Pedro Lopez did not rely on intelligence or deception. He relied on invisibility. Andrei Chitaliko operated in a system that refused to believe someone like him could exist. Born in 1936 in what is now Ukraine, Chitaliko grew up during extreme hardship. His childhood was marked by poverty, famine, and repeated humiliation. He struggled socially, professionally, and psychologically throughout his life. Outwardly, Chitaliko appeared unremarkable. He worked as a factory employee and later as a teacher. Someone easy to overlook. Between 1978 and 1990, Chitaliko carried out a series of murders across multiple regions of the Soviet Union. His victims were often women and children traveling alone. What made his crimes especially difficult to stop was not only his mobility, but the environment in which he operated. At the time, Soviet authorities publicly denied the existence of serial killers. Such crimes were labeled as a symptom of Western societies, not socialism. This denial had consequences. For years, investigators were discouraged from linking cases together. Patterns were ignored, connections were dismissed. Several innocent people were arrested. Some were wrongly convicted. Others were executed for crimes Chikatilo had committed. The investigation eventually became one of the largest in Soviet history. Thousands of suspects were questioned. Resources were deployed across vast territories. In 1990, forensic evidence finally connected Chikatilo to multiple murders. He was arrested and later confessed. His trial was public and chaotic. His behavior shocked observers and reinforced the horror of his crimes. In 1994, Andrei Chitaliko was executed by firing squad. His case exposed a dangerous truth. When ideology overrides reality, violence is allowed to grow unchecked. Chikatilo did not hide behind charm or intelligence. He hid behind denial. Harold Shipman was not feared. He was trusted. Born in 1946 in Nottingham, England, Shipman became a respected general practitioner. He worked for years as a family doctor, treating generations of patients in the same community. To many, he represented reassurance, professionalism, safety. But behind that image, Shipman was quietly killing the very people who trusted him most. From the 1970s until the late 1990s, Shipman caused the deaths of an estimated 250 patients. Most of them were elderly. Most of them died in their own homes under his care. What allowed Shipman to operate for so long was not secrecy, but authority. He signed death certificates. He controlled medical records. He decided what appeared normal and what did not. For years, the deaths raised little suspicion. They were explained as natural causes, as age, as illness. It was only when patterns became impossible to ignore that doubts emerged. an unusually high number of deaths, consistent timing, similar circumstances. A local undertaker and another doctor began to raise concerns. An investigation followed. When authorities uncovered the scale of what Shipman had done, the shock was national. In 2000, Harold Shipman was convicted of 15 murders, though investigators believe the true number was far higher. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 2004, Shipman died in his cell. His case triggered major reforms in the United Kingdom. Medical oversight was strengthened. Prescription monitoring was tightened. Death certification procedures were changed. Harold Shipman revealed a deeply unsettling truth. When trust is absolute, it can be weaponized. Shipman did not hide in the shadows. He hid behind a white coat. Dennis Rader did not try to disappear. He wanted to be known. Born in 1945 in Kansas, Rader lived a life that appeared stable and disciplined. He was married, had children, held steady jobs, and was active in his church. To neighbors and colleagues, he seemed responsible and reliable, a man who followed rules. But behind that routine, Rader was carefully planning violence. Between 1974 and 1991, he murdered 10 people in the Wichita area. He referred to himself by the initials BTK, bind, torture, kill. What set Rader apart was not only his method, but his need for attention. He sent letters to police and local media, described his crimes in detail, mocked investigators for failing to catch him. For years, the letters stopped. Rader appeared to vanish. In reality, he had simply returned to his normal life, working, raising a family, participating in his community. In 2004, after more than a decade of silence, Rader resurfaced. He contacted the media again, convinced he was untouchable. That confidence led to his downfall. Rader sent a floppy disk to police asking if it could be traced. Investigators answered falsely. The disk led directly to him. In 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested. The revelation stunned his family and his community. He was convicted of 10 murders and sentenced to multiple life terms. Dennis Rader proved a dangerous lesson. Some killers are not driven by chaos. They are driven by ego. And sometimes, the need to be recognized is what finally exposes them. Jack the Ripper remains one of the most famous unidentified killers in history. Not because he was caught, but because he never was. In 1888, London's Whitechapel district was crowded, poor, and tense, a place of narrow streets, night work, and constant movement. It was here that a series of murders shocked Victorian England. At least 5 women were killed within a short period of time. The attacks were brutal and precise, leaving investigators struggling to understand who could be responsible. What set the case apart was not only the violence, but the mystery that surrounded it. No clear suspect was ever identified, no arrest was made, and no confession was confirmed. As fear spread, newspapers became deeply involved in the story. Sensational headlines filled the streets. Public anxiety grew with every new report. Letters began arriving at newsrooms and police stations signed with the name Jack the Ripper. Whether genuine or not, they fueled panic and fascination. The case quickly became one of the first modern media frenzies. Speculation exploded, rumors spread. The killer became a figure larger than the crimes themselves. Over time, dozens of suspects were proposed. Doctors, artists, public figures, even members of the upper class. None were proven. More than a century later, modern forensic techniques have produced theories, but no definitive answer. The mystery remains. Jack the Ripper became more than a criminal. He became a symbol, a reminder of how fear, mystery, and media attention can transform violence into legend. And once a legend is created, it never truly disappears. Richard Ramirez did not blend in quietly. He spread fear openly. Born in 1960 in Texas, Ramirez grew up in a troubled environment and was exposed to violence at an early age. As he got older, he drifted into crime, substance abuse, and a fascination with dark beliefs. Between 1984 and 1985, Ramirez carried out a series of home invasions across California, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and surrounding areas. What made his crimes especially terrifying was their unpredictability. He attacked without a clear pattern, different neighborhoods, different victims, different times of night. No one felt safe. Windows were locked, lights stayed on, entire communities changed their routines. The press gave him a name, the Night Stalker. As the investigation intensified, Ramirez's face appeared on the front pages of newspapers. That exposure led to an unexpected turn. In 1985, residents recognized him in public. They chased him, and he was captured by civilians before police arrived. His trial became a media spectacle. His behavior in court shocked observers and drew national attention. Ramirez was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to death. He remained on death row for decades. In 2013, Richard Ramirez died in prison of natural causes, but his impact lasted far longer than his crimes. The Night Stalker case showed how fear can grip an entire region when violence feels random, when no one knows who might be next. Ramirez did not rely on secrecy. He relied on chaos. And chaos, more than anything else, leaves a lasting mark. These stories are disturbing not just because of what happened, but because of how easily it was allowed to happen. If this video helped you understand the darker side of history, leave a like. And if you want more real cases, real mysteries, and forgotten stories, subscribe to the channel. There are still many files left in the dark.